Okay, that's great. It's great. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, let's dive right in. I was very optimistic when I planned the amount of slides, so I might go rather fast. But just so that you know, in the end, there's a link with all the tools that I mentioned, although the slides, some articles. And so if there's anything you missed maybe in the slides, you can check it out later. And of course, you can also do what Alex recommended earlier. If you can't follow me, just wave and be like, slow down. So we'll try that. We'll see how it goes. The clock's ticking. So we'll dive right in. Please prepare for a little bit of an introduction to accessibility. We'll talk about how to sell it, because as I learned, that is one of the most important things of my role, at least. We'll look at the most common accessibility issues and how to find them. And then we're going to dive into some tools. So I'm going to show you the tools that I'm using to find the issues in accessibility. And there will be lots of cat memes to keep you entertained in this afternoon slot. All right, really briefly about me. My name's Josefine. I'm from Germany. And in my free time, I hang upside down because I'm also an aerial acrobat. And I'm also an introvert. So if you have any questions that you don't want to ask right now with the group or in this app, you can also contact me later or find me on socials or write me an email. All is fine. So let's dive right in. So we need a common goal, right? Look, what are we aiming for when I talk about web accessibility? And for me, that means complying with web standards, more specifically with the WCAG 2.2. And there's three different levels: A, AA, and AAA, AAA being the strictest. Are you, maybe show of hands, who's working with accessibility, testing for accessibility? Quite a few people, so that's great. And then I can justify for myself going through it very fast. That's great. We're also trying to create context for as many users as possible, right? And what I mean by that is, again, the accessibility community, they love acronyms. So it's called the POUR principles. We want to make sure our content is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust so that it can be interpreted by many different user agents. And while that might seem a little bit abstract in the beginning, most of the rules that can be found in the web accessibility guidelines can be kind of brought back to that. And so if you're thinking, why am I doing this? Why should I care about this? It's probably complying with one of the principles to make sure that we're creating context for people to actually understand what we want to convey with our content, with our website or service. And when I went into web accessibility, I very optimistically thought I could work towards making the web accessible, eliminate all errors and issues. And I learned very quickly that's probably not going to be the case, but we can reduce barriers, right? And we can try not necessarily to create new ones with the code that we create or the products, the content that we release. And that is, I think, what we should be aiming for. And so there are many good reasons to care about web accessibility. And I'm assuming if you made it here out of all the great content that we have at the conference, you already care a little bit. And I applaud that. I'm really happy you made it here. Usually, it's not enough. Like, to convince somebody to care about web accessibility, caring is unfortunately usually not enough. Accessibility is actually part of the UN Convention of the Rights for People with Disabilities. So it's a human right, access to information. But what really convinces people, your managers, the people who are supposed to spend the money on accessibility, is money, unfortunately. I hate that, to be honest. I really am an optimist, and I want us all to create a better future together for everybody. But usually what counts is the money. And so what I then usually talk about is how, we're human, right? And humans relate to their own experiences. And sometimes it's difficult to put yourselves in the shoes of others. as testers, I'm sure you're more experienced than most at this, but in general, for us humans, it's difficult. And so if we think about web accessibility, we can then, if we want to sell it to somebody, say, okay, so it's not only people with disabilities who will benefit from web accessibility, it's everybody. And that really opens up like a massive user base, right? And again, I'm not saying this is morally correct. I think it should be enough that just a few people might benefit from it, but it helps when you're selling to say, hey, so you benefit from subtitles on Netflix. Maybe you want to continue watching a TikTok video on the tube, but you don't want your neighbor to hear. Or maybe you're in a loud environment, you can't turn up the sound. Maybe you're in the sunshine, like right now, the sun is shining on your screen, you can't see something. So all of these are cases in which web accessibility will be beneficial. And sometimes that helps to broaden kind of the perspective of the amount of users. Because complying with web accessibility will create a larger customer base or more potential customers. And it also, numbers also help. So sometimes it helps to talk about the statistics by the WHO. So they found that 15% of the global population are experiencing some form of disability. Again, global data is super hard to collect, but even if it's just a ballpark, that's so many people, and so much revenue also that the company might be losing out on, that it might help a little bit. And also, like, if you are in the process of trying to convince somebody to care, collecting data on lost opportunities might be something to look into, because that makes it very tangible of the amount of money that a company could have made, right? Again, so I keep coming back to the money aspect. I'm not a fan of it, but I found that it really helps. Also, accessibility is regulated. So all of the companies on that slide, they're all US-based, but they all got sued based on accessibility violations. And this could be us and our employers in the future, right? So there's different kinds of laws. And I just see that my emojis are not displayed correctly. That's a shame, because there were little flags in there. But imagine little flags for the individual countries. So there's different kinds of laws for different countries. In the US is the most prominent, and that's also where most of the lawsuits happened. Canada and Norway, the UK are also kind of pioneers, I guess you could say, in this space. But the big elephant in the room in this case is that there are more laws coming to the EU, and they're the EAA, so another abbreviation, and it's basically a new law for everyday products and services and to make them more accessible. And that applies to lots of different things. So for example, to banking, to messenger services, communication, lots of things that are transportation related, also air travel. And the biggest one is e-commerce, right? So this will, with a few exceptions, affect a lot of people in the EU in the future. And so the implementation, or how the law and the penalties are in the different member states is a little bit different, but generally is quite similar, right? And it's all based on, so I'm not a lawyer, but it's all based on this norm EN3. I'm so bad with numbers in English, so I'm going to let you have a look at this yourself. But it's based on the WCAG that I was looking at, I was sharing earlier, right? The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. That's kind of the set of rules that we're using for this. And this is kind of the norm that this is based on, and then interpreted by the different European member states. And the fun part is it's coming next year. So June 28th, 2025 is when this is coming into place in all the different EU member states. And I'm kind of like, as an accessibility advocate, I'm a little bit hoping that it will cause people to freak out a tiny bit maybe and wake up and care more actively about accessibility. Because in the end, if we don't have to, who's going to do the harder things, right? And so we're going to have a look next at what we can actually do, where can we start looking? And so there's a report, it's also linked in the resources in the end, it's by WebAIM, and they looked at 1 million most popular websites, they crawled them automatically, and they had a look at what are the most common issues in terms of web accessibility, and they found that color contrast was a big issue, so the background and the foreground don't have enough difference, basically, and that's almost on over 80% of all the websites have had this. Missing alternative text, so adding an alternate to any kind of visual thing to make sure that there's context for people who can't see, or also if the image isn't loading. Missing form inputs, empty links and buttons also happens a lot, and the missing document language. And now if you look at these things, you might say like, that doesn't sound like super complicated. Why are we not tackling this, right? But it's so widely spread. And there's tools that we can use to find these things and potentially fix them. And actually, yeah, so only 3% of the web pages they found in this report are accessible, right? And so I feel like we as a community can do better and tackle this. And so when we now look at accessibility in practice, we can use different kinds of tools. I have no affiliation with them. I just like them, and they're all linked in the end. The first thing that I would commonly look at would be keyboard accessibility and the navigation, right? And it might be a little bit small, but there's small numbers attached to the individual elements. And what I did there was visualize the tab order and the tab flow. So how would I go through the page if I was using a keyboard, right? And here's a different tool. This is done with Chrome, and before it was something missing on my slides. Anyway, this is done with Stark, which is an accessibility testing tool. It has a lot of other capabilities, but this is one, visualizing the tab flow. And then here we can see this is just something you can do within Chrome, within the DevTools, right? And we want to make sure it's in a logical order. We want to make sure the focus is actually visible. And we want to make sure it's kind of in the same way that we would read something. And we also want to check that the focus has enough color contrast. And here you see me tapping through my employer's website, and we'll see the focus, for example, on the buttons. It's not very coherent. It doesn't really look like I would expect it to. It looks different in different places. And we also want to make sure we're not trapping our users, right? We want to make sure all the functionality that we have with the mouse, for example, we would also have with a keyboard. That includes hover functionalities. And that also means I'm not trapping my user in a modal where they can't get out of without a mouse, for example. So the second thing I would look at would be color contrast. And there's a lot of different tools you can use to do this. And one of them is this one. I like it because it looks pretty. It's called Color Contrast Checker. And you can select two different colors, the foreground against the background. And what you are probably aiming for would be something like the AA standard, which would be a minimum of 4.5:1 ratio. And the tools, all of the different tools will tell you exactly where you are on that scale, basically, so you don't have to worry about the individual numbers so much. There are also tools like visual simulators. So here I simulated, for example, sunshine on my phone, but I could also use it to visualize any kind of visual deficiencies or impairments, like if you can only see, or you have a red-green color blindness, or you can only see monochromatic, so no color at all. And so there are all these different things that you can simulate. It might not be 100% a replica of people's experience, but it's a first draft to kind of see, okay, how does this feel from different users' perspectives? And then I can use it to guide me from there, because here you can see our brand color, this light teal with white, it just doesn't work. And as soon as there is like a bit of sunshine, for example, is impossible to see. Again, you can also do this in Chrome. They have a really cool CSS overview in beta, and you can see all your different colors and how they work together and what you would be allowed kind of to use together. And then it would look at how, like, suggestions also on what you could use together and what you should rather avoid, for example. Next, you could move into screen reader testing. So you could use, for example, if you're working on a MacBook, you could use VoiceOver. It's already built in. You can search for it with a Spotlight search, and it will start a screen reader, and it will read out the content to you. And you can, there's also a tutorial built in. You can try and figure out how this works. Of course, this is better if you have that kind of testing with users who are native screen reader users and use this on a regular basis. But it's good to get kind of a glimpse of, it's kind of a little bit like a sneak peek into what else might be going wrong, right? You can start testing with it and you notice, okay, it's actually not announcing this kind of interactive element at all. Let me investigate further on what's going on. So sometimes, even though you might not 100% familiar with how it works, it can be a good starting point. We can also look into semantic HTML, as that's kind of the foundation of all the other things that can go wrong. In the meanwhile, that could be inspecting an element and checking. And here, for example, we have something that looks like a button, but is actually an A element, so a link with the roll button. And there would be reason to investigate on why that is and whether that could be changed, because of course, if you can use a native element of semantic HTML, then you probably should, because it's, again, like sharing context with the user and providing information rather than just the styling. We can also use something like HTML validation tools, which would give you an overview of many of the things that might be wrong on your page, and then you could go deep dive from there. And that's actually a really good segue into the automated tools. So there's, for example, XDevTools is one tool that is like a plugin that you can use, and you can run an automated audit on your entire page. And then it will give you an overview of all the things that it finds. It's probably not everything, like the automated testing. I'm preaching through the choir here, but the automated testing, of course, doesn't negate the need for manual testing, but still is a good place to start, and it gives you lots of additional context and ideas on what else you could be doing. There's also Chrome Lighthouse, where you can run an accessibility test to see what maybe other things come up in their testing. And then you can kind of go from there. And of course, you don't have to test in production. You could also run linters on your code. And X, again, they provide lots of really good tooling for that. And there's also tools for the individual programming languages. So that was a lot. I have 2 minutes left. Where could you get started if you were now very motivated to start accessibility testing? So of course, in an ideal world, we would start right from the beginning. That it would be the easiest and the most effective. In most cases, reality looks a little bit different, and we have a bunch of legacy code that we need to work with, right? And so then I would start with an audit of what the status is of the product. And that, again, can be very overwhelming. So my suggestion would be to check, what is our goal? Do we want to reach AA standard? Do we want the whole page? Do we want every service to be compliant? What are the resources to achieve that? And if there are not many resources, which might be, then it would be a good idea to identify any kind of quick wins or low-hanging fruit. What is the most common user journey? Maybe we can start there. Maybe we can start on the 3 most used pages or services to see if we can make changes there. And then we can also create kind of a proof of our concept, right? We can say, okay, this worked really well. Maybe the conversions went up, or maybe you have another metric that you can use to say, hey, this was super successful. Let's do it on the entire product now, because I can justify that I need resources for that, right? So that would be my suggestion on where to start. And with 40 seconds left, I can now share the resources with you. You can either scan the QR code or enter the link, and you will find all the tools that I just mentioned there. Please look happy if it worked, because sometimes yes, okay, great. Thank you so much for the feedback. And if you take anything away from this, it's that accessibility concerns all of us. It's our shared responsibility. And when we take small steps together, we can move towards a more accessible web one step at a time. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot. you managed it.
Yeah.
So let's start. It may be not the most important, but it was really upvoted. How many cats do you have?
Just one, unfortunately.
How
But
many do you want?
it's a really good one. So.
And there was another question. Do you consider yourself a cat person?
Oh yes.
Okay, this was the easy one. Now let's get into deeper waters. What kind of trainings are there to learn accessibility testing?
So it depends on your time and resources, I guess. I took a exam. It's called CPACC. It's by IAAP. Oh my God, so many abbreviations. There is a global association for accessibility, and they provide these kind of standardized trainings. And this is the most official recognized one that I know. But this is, you have to pay for that certification. And then there's also free trainings, for example, by Google, which are a really good start. If you're starting out and not sure if you want to invest money, I would suggest going into that.
Okay, talking about money, how would one start advocating for accessibility for your manager's take? So how shall you convince your management to invest?
It's a marathon, not a sprint. They're very reluctant, usually. If you make positive experiences, please share with me because I need some motivation as well. I would start positive. So I feel like I had the most success pointing out where we can create improvements, but not focusing on the negative, saying like, oh, this is all wrong, but rather saying like, hey, so if we improve this, this is how people would benefit, how it would improve the user experience, or like what other benefits does it have, and kind of focus on the positive. I think that's how I would go about it.
Oh, a question from our keynote speaker, Alex. So nice. So what do development teams and product owners need to do to make sure that accessibility test is being built in and left in after change?
It's long, wait. Yeah. Right. So I would try and start as early and make sure everybody understands that it's a shared responsibility. So it's not pointing fingers at QA, for example, but rather saying, where can the UX team, where can the designers, where can the developers contribute their perspective to make sure we'll always overlook something and we'll need a test, but that's where I would start with education and awareness. And then when people know, usually they're very happy to make all of these changes. And yeah, I would start there, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, what is your opinion about the Wave tool? Do you know Wave tool?
Yes, I'm personally not using it, but that's just personal preference. But if I remember correctly, it's also using X under the hood, isn't it? So you look as confused as I am. So I think it's using the same kind of machine under the hood, basically. But I have not a lot of experience with that one.
Okay, testing, for example, screen readers for users who have visual impairment is very hard for testers who are not used to them. How can one tackle such a task?
Yes. Ideally, get people to test it who use screen readers natively, right? So it's a matter of convincing people to spend money on it. But I think if you can outsource or even better, hire people with disabilities who use these tools natively, do that, please. If that's not an option for whatever reason, I would focus on that document that makes sure that people who pay for this know that you can only go to a certain extent, kind of not focusing on your own limitations, quote unquote, but rather saying there are folks who can do this better and we should pay them. And then if I have to do it and my company doesn't want to pay for additional testers, for example, I literally Google everything, the expected behavior of the screen reader, to make sure to kind of bridge that gap until I can convince them to pay somebody who's more skilled at that.
That's cool. Last question. Can you recommend an article or website with some scaring figures? How many % have problems with red and green? So scaring figures, I think it's more like shocking numbers or shocking data regarding accessibility testing.
Okay. So There are some articles in the link tree, and you can check there. There are also some really nice articles by, I think, Carl Groves writes a lot about the return on investment in terms of accessibility, and he quotes a lot of like the economical data, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm happy to share that afterwards, and you can reach out to me if I find something that can help you there.
Okay, finishing with that, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And another round of applause, please, for Josefine.
Thank you. This stays here.